for having us. I didn't know I was going to be working at height, although I work at height every day on my feet, so I thought I'd put some appropriate footwear on. That's not... Can everyone hear me all right? So I'm just going to start with an acknowledgement of country. Ngana Kardich Nijawajuk Nunga Buja, and Ngana Kardich Nunga Morat Korokora, which is, I acknowledge those old Nunga's families going way, way back a long time for the amazing knowledge and wisdom that they thought of and came up with as the first humans to engage with this part of Australia. And that was a long, long time ago. And also Ngana Kardich Nunakanyiye, which is, I acknowledge everyone here today, to this space of sharing information that we're in. That should have been there, by the way. Nunga Buja. Social inclusion. It's a privilege to be asked to speak at this event. It's really wonderful to see this kind of thing talked about. I just want to kick off by mentioning seasonal inclusion, because I feel like for the last couple of weeks all I've heard is everyone whinge about the rain. Life is this amazing cycle, and it would be boring if every single day it was fine and sunny and 25. Put your hand up if you're composed mostly of water and you like to drink water. Yep, we need the rain. So this is the beautiful Noongar season of Makaru, when the lifeblood is replenishing our landscape, and it's wonderful to see rain going back onto these granite outcrops that we're seeing up in the hills. It's a bit of a day off Makaru today, and it'll be back into it next week. So I'm 6'8". I was always tall though. I was probably about 6'1" here when I was 4. And always liked birds ever since I can remember, the feathered ones. And I always liked taking notes about birds. I can remember getting a diary, a bird watching journal, keeping info about birds in my backyard and beyond in this book. And I always liked climbing trees. Who likes climbing trees? Great. So climbing trees is something that lots of people do as kids, but you supposedly grow out of. I don't reckon you should grow out of anything that you love doing. And I was very lucky that when I was 12, I got given some climbing gear as a combined Christmas birthday present. And that led me to learning about safety. My mum and dad were amazingly supportive in my climbing obsession. I went to the quarry, I learned abseiling. And when I was a teenager, about 13 or 14, I was very much not socially included. I started high school, I was bullied for being tall, for being a nerd, for liking nature. And I didn't feel like I was really part of a bigger group of people that shared the same values at all. But I decided then to very consciously to do what I was passionate about, and whether it was me on my own or me with a group, I was out in the bush, and I climbed up a tree, or lots of trees. I built this tree house, and that was my kind of happy place. And I feel like I saw lots of birds, but wedge-tailed eagles used to turn up a fair bit. And I feel like they cast a bit of a spell on me. Cast a smell? No. That's for the toddlers nowadays. Cast a spell on me, and I was interested in researching them after finding a nest, and that sort of led me on a lifelong journey of research, building more tree houses. I've done a few jobs as a wildlife filmmaker and a scientist. Not a weight you are now. I'm a scientist, although some people think I look like a surfer probably. I really like, as part of social inclusion, not having a stereotype associated with anything. So science has these long-winded dictionary definitions, and people seem to think that scientists all work in labs. Science is just about questions. Every person is actually born as a scientist. You are all scientists that I'm talking to now. Because we all are curious about our world when we start off. We want to know about it. We ask questions. And all scientists are is people that use evidence to answer the questions that we have about our natural world. Zoya mentioned I'm still doing a PhD. That's the never-ending story at the moment. I won't get bogged down there. But my job is to be an advocate for the environment, and be an interface between the environment and people. In this amazing place, Noongar Buja, southwest WA, there is nowhere else on the planet like the area that we live in. It is incredibly unique. It has global recognition. It's the only part of Australia globally recognised for its biodiversity. And part of that biodiversity is the trees. It's a land of trees down here. Now, what's the most common tree in Australia generally? Hands up, call out. Eucalypt, gum tree, well done, awesome. So gum trees, they're fascinating things. They're great to climb. One of the most amazing things about them is that they are one of the largest flowers on the planet. You don't necessarily think a gum tree is like the little flower in your garden. But a thing that's less well known about them is their propensity to form hollows. So trees are comprised of two parts, the sapwood, which is the tissue on the outside, and the heartwood, which is the dead xylem in the middle. And the trees don't use that. It's no longer used except for structural purposes. But gum trees have this amazing ability to form these hollows. Does anyone know how that happens? No? Yes? Some people. Basically, the heartwood can decay, and a range of things can contribute to heartwood decay. This little fella in that picture was a numbat, and his favourite food is the main cause of a tree hollow, which are these things, termites. You don't like them in your house, but termites are everywhere, and they in the ground, and they come up into the trees when they're still alive. They contribute to decaying the heartwood. And a hollow isn't just a hole, it's basically a hole in the tree, and think of it like your house. You need a doorway, you need a corridor to get in, but you also, critically, you need a living space. It's not much fun in your bedroom if you don't have a floor. And a tree hollow like that is a home for species called hollow-dependent fauna. They can't build their own nest or house. And the thing about tree hollows is they take an excruciatingly long time to form, a century to form a hole about that big or more. So trees that are hundreds of years old are not single organisms, they're living hotels, and they are incredibly important parts of our landscape. What lives in them? A whole range of birds use them as nest sites. Things like mammals do, bats and lizards, and there's an animal that uses tree hollows to nest in that's sort of happening or coming out at this time of year.
The
This
ducks
is an
are worried
excerpt from a
that the young are
documentary.
ready and the female must call them down quickly.
And we were sitting in hides for a couple of days to film this footage, my friend Adam and I.
They're most vulnerable. They're reluctant at first, but then
So yes, those plops are real. They weren't faked by the BBC.
the ducklings drop like stones, but their light and fluffy bodies help them absorb the impact.
So the only thing
The
those
female
ducklings
listens for the
know
last two
is
of
the
her
sound
brood.
of their mother's voice, and whether it means stepping into gravity to follow it or not, it doesn't matter. So old trees are living hotels. They're incredibly important. They are homes to a range of fauna, but we haven't treated them very well since European settlement. So about 200 years ago, white fellas came here and decided that old trees were great to cut down and ship overseas. The logging industry was one of the first jobs and economies that started here. When the impacts really started to occur, though, was after World War II. The technology was sophisticated enough to shave the land like me shaving your arms or your legs. And it was this idea that to make country productive, it had to not have any trees on it. So this is footage shot in the 50s and 60s, and there was an idea that 1 million acres a year had to be cleared, otherwise we were sort of wasting our effort. So if you're a black cockatoo, these are the breath of the land. These are the breath of country, these birds, that historically when it's muckaroo and it rains inland and the lifeblood is reintroduced to our landscape, providing the nutrients for all the flowers and plants to set seed, these black cockatoos move inland to breeding grounds. It's like the country breathing them in, and they move in their hundreds, flocks of thousands moved inland. And after their breeding season and they've raised chicks and the summer is coming, Birak is approaching, the land is drying out and resources are scarce, they then migrate back to the coast over summer, just like the land blowing out again. In only 50 to 70 years, it went to from forest and woodland to largely cleared. So the largest man-made desert on the planet just about, and black cockatoos have very few places to migrate to where there is a housing estate left. There are other housing estates being put on the surface of our land in my lifetime, and I've observed this enormously. Huge impacts to habitat, trees, but not as much as this. So Aboriginal people knew for a long time that burning country was really important to reduce fuel loads, to get rid of the grass, to stimulate new grass, and in doing that, practice, it preserved old trees because it was done in a right way. Fire these days is done in a different way, and there's a prescription that is applied to the landscape which really doesn't involve people anymore. But if prescribed burning stops and protects lives, property and infrastructure, then why does this happen? So this is the Warraloo wildfire, an enormous impact to the landscape. I think there might have been a slide missing there, but maybe not. That's responsible, fires like that anyway, for an enormous number of habitat trees that are lost, these big old trees. The most important thing we can do is save old trees and keep them in our landscape because they're irreplaceable in our lifetime, but nesting boxes can be used to create artificial tree hollows. And we can turn trees that are young into very old ones. When I was a kid, we had a possum living in our roof, and my dad and I had a bit of an argument. He said, well, I don't want that blasted thing in there, it's going to wee on the ceiling. And my dad embodied the colonial mindset of fighting nature. And I said, well, maybe we can build it a home, maybe it doesn't have anywhere else to live. Thank goodness for Burke's Backyard. There was a magazine that I found that had a nest box design. My friend Mark and I built a nest box, and I kept building those things as a teenager. One day in 2011, I discovered there was a highway extension and a bridge project, and there was lots of form ply wood left over that was great to build boxes with because it was waterproof, it lasted a long time. And I rang them up and said, do you reckon I can have one of those sheets? And they said, we pay for every tonne of that stuff that goes to landfill. Come and have as much as you want. So I started the Recycology project, which was about building nest boxes with kids and teaching them about tree hollows and trying to inspire a generation about the importance of biodiversity at their school. Fires that impact tree hollows are becoming more frequent. The Warraloo fire burnt 830 AFL football fields in size, an enormous area. And there was more than 300 trees aged more than 200 years old that were completely lost. You can see in the top right here, there's the ghost of a tree that's left after it's been bowled over by the fire and then burnt over the subsequent weeks. As part of the response to this, I knew I had to do something. I was sitting in my office watching the fire on the internet burn that night. I was completely choked emotionally. I felt like a part of my body was burning. I knew the country very well, and it was a horrendous fire. Fortunately, thanks to the community, we managed to raise more than $10,000 in a fortnight. And the idea was to try and replace some of the hollows that were left, that were missing, that had been destroyed by the fire, but also do something for people whose properties had been razed and that were restoring hopefully back to something after the fire. And people's restoration and recovery from a wildfire event cannot be talked about as a separate thing from the environmental restoration and recovery, because people and the environment are intricately linked. So what we managed to do is basically get funding to men's sheds and to volunteer groups. There was a high school involved, an amazing member of the community in Mount Helena, Arthur Rosenwald. He rang me and said, can I build some nest boxes? I managed to channel those funds out and get some scrap material and start building boxes. I paid some consultants to go and do a property assessment because I wasn't allowed to be involved in the project in case it was perceived as a conflict of interest, because I do nest boxes for a job. I didn't see that coming. I just wanted to raise some money to help the bush. But some friends went out and assessed properties and recommended where nest boxes could go, and they did a lot of talking to landowners who had lost everything that they'd ever worked for. And then we had an amazing volunteer group, Marsupial Mamas and Papas, who care for sick and injured wildlife. They donated a car and a trailer, and I managed to get some people, especially Isaac and Stephen, who volunteered to deliver these nest boxes. So it was kind of like a Father Christmas. It was just a black trailer instead of a sleigh, going around and delivering boxes to people, and they'd open them and there was nothing in there, sorry. But it was part of getting this sort of community feel happening. And installing over 200 boxes was a gargantuan task, but Darling Range Wildlife Shelter, who actually contributed 20% of the funds to the crowdfund in the start, their volunteers and I worked day and night. We were up cherry pickers in July when it was pouring with rain. I've never been knee deep in water in a cherry picker bucket before, but there's a first time for everything. And we managed to install these nest boxes. We were really keen to try and get them up before the breeding season, because that's when most hollow-dependent fauna are going to be looking for places to nest, for refuge, and we weren't able to then monitor the boxes. There were over 200, but There was 20 that were huge boxes with top entries designed for our black cockatoos. And we had an incredible uptake. About 60% of those boxes were used by pairs of Carnaby's cockatoos in a really hot part of the fire. It was literally a phoenix feeling, that out of the ashes came these really positive stories where an endangered species is still managing to breed in a raised landscape. And one of the best stories I had was from a couple that have 50 acres in Gidgee. Their whole property was burnt, but they were rebuilding their house, and they would knock off from doing whatever they were doing as part of the recovery, the cement pad that went down, the walls going up, and they would delight in these cockatoos coming in for the evening feed, going into this nest box and feeding their chick that was inside. And that was such a precious little light to shine out of such a dark time for so many people. So to finish, we live on an incredible ecosystem, the only planet that supports life that we know of. And it's a big interconnected jigsaw puzzle of life. Interconnectedness is a key word. It's similar to inclusion. What humans did is we invented this stuff, which is a substitute for the energy that animals and plants transport around their economy. And we've kind of made it all about us and not about everything. Biodiversity, that is part of that jigsaw puzzle, it's a bit like your body. So you've got all these parts of you that make you really amazing and work really, really well when you're all together. That is you, singular. And you as individuals. But if you lose one or two of these parts, it might not be so bad. You can probably keep living. But if you lose too many, then eventually you reach a point, a threshold where you can't come back from, and there's no life left. So biodiversity is a really important thing, and inclusivity with humans and us as a diverse culture is really important, and it's also really important to extend our thoughts out to other living things that we share our space with as well. And this is the conclusion I want to end on. Diversity is resilience. The more amazing, diverse people there are in our communities, the more skills we have to contribute to these projects. Elvis said at the start, and that is the key for the whole night. I think that together as one, we can do it, basically. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk, to share those stories. And to Zoya and Laura, thanks for inviting us to be here. If you want any more info, there's a couple of websites. Thanks a lot.
Nice.